A young couple meet and marry, but an affair rips their family apart and makes bad blood between former friends. The new couple has a lot of problems and a collection of guns at their disposal. Simmering hatred erupts into violence. Authorities are twisted and turned in a labyrinth of deception as they dig deeper and deeper to discover who pulls the trigger on Helium Road. Amarillo is the Spanish word for yellow, and the name of the 14th most populous city in the state of Texas. Settled in 1887, the name probably sprang from the color of Amarillo's subsoil. Houses were once painted yellow to honor the name. Today, Amarillo is the home of the only nuclear weapons assembly and disassembly facility in the country, which gave rise to its nickname, Bomb City. The state of Texas is considered to have some of the most relaxed gun laws in the United States.
Three WT students were sharing a house out in rural Randall County, west of Amarillo, and they were on their way to their house when they drove down Helium Road and saw this vehicle on the side of the road and what looked like maybe a body, and they were afraid to approach the vehicle, but they called 911 and the sheriff's department was dispatched. Fairly quickly, they had identified the victim as Robin Spielbauer.
Robin is a young woman with a domestic bent, inspired by her parents' happy marriage and thriving careers in the United States military. She wants the same kind of life and to be a mother, but Robin is conflicted. While she aspires to a clean-cut, nice man like her dad, she is also attracted to bad boys.
Robin was a military brat who moved with her family from North Dakota to Amarillo, Texas in 1995. Robin began working at a local cafe in Amarillo, and she soon met Jeremy David Spielbauer in 2003.
Known as JD, he tells her about his service in the Marine Corps, with combat time in Iraq and Afghanistan. The pair becomes inseparable.
Robin and JD's relationship progressed very quickly. Robin's parents, the Bledsoes, were surprised at how quickly the relationship progressed. However, they trusted that their daughter was making good decisions, and ultimately they just wanted Robin to be happy, and it seemed as if she was happy with JD.
They met in 2003 and married in 2005. After she and JD married, they had 2 children.
But parenting comes with new stresses, and cracks begin to show in their relationship. The couple decides to attend church, hoping it will strengthen the foundation of their marriage. It's at the church that the Spielbauers meet a young criminal justice student.
JD and Robin, from time to time, attended church at a place called Cowboy Church. It's up south of Amarillo, and Katie Phipps was also attending church there. And for a while, Katie and Robin actually struck up a friendship.
Robin was friends with Katie and trusted Katie in her relationship with JD. However, JD was telling Katie that his relationship or marriage with Robin was on the rocks and that they were headed for divorce. Robin and JD started going multiple times a week. Some of their friends questioned what their newfound interest in the church was, and some of them believed that it wasn't the religion that was drawing them to the church.
Katie babysits for them occasionally, and sometimes Katie's daughter sleeps over at their place.
Katie became very close with Robin and JD, and they welcomed her into the family. Robin didn't notice that the relationship between JD and Katie was growing until it was too late.
The two lovers proclaimed their feelings. Robin files for divorce, and once it's finalized in 2013, JD marries Katie.
JD and Katie had a lot of things in common, including their love of firearms. Between them, they had quite a collection of guns. There was stress in their marriage because Robin was still involved in their relationship due to the fact that JD and Robin had children together. Katie didn't like that and was jealous of the fact that Robin was still involved in their lives.
Robin moves back into her parents' home with her children in 2013, and she struggles to make ends meet. JD and Robin fight incessantly over visitation rights and child support. There's an incident where JD needs to borrow part of a $400 a month child support payment to Robin to pay for his household with Katie.
Robin is mad and depressed about JD and Katie's new marriage. To make matters worse, the newlyweds moved in down the street from Robin's parents, so she frequently had to see them while she was at her parents' house.
There was a lot of animosity between Katie and Robin, and everyone knew it. It was no secret. Everyone knew it.
With tensions high between Robin, Katie, and JD, it seems like just a matter of time before they boil over. After a series of texts, Robin tucks her two children into bed and tells her mother she'll be back later. Katie picks up her son Diego and takes him to spend the evening with her best friend. JD is in the company of someone as well.
He calls his Uncle Ty, and Ty comes over to the house, and they drink a couple of beers and talk.
Robin leaves her family and goes out into the night to an undisclosed location. Little does she know, this will be the last drive she ever takes. Amarillo is the 14th most populous city in the state of Texas. It is in Amarillo that JD and Robin Spielbauer marry and have children. But JD's affair with a mutual friend turns into a messy divorce and remarriage. The three former friends struggle to be civil. On Helium Road, April 8th, 2014, a driver notices something bizarre. What appears to be a bloodied body is spotted beside an SUV. Emergency vehicles are summoned to the scene. The morning after Robin goes out, Robin's mother wakes up to see Robin never returned home to sleep. Initially, she isn't concerned, as Robin occasionally spends the night with friends. But by later in the morning, Robin's parents call and text some of Robin's friends and hunt for her presence on social media. Robin's dad calls police and hospitals in the area. The Amarillo Police Department shows up to the house around 11 a.m. to file a missing persons report.
Under Texas law, there's no waiting period to report a missing person if the reporting person thinks that the missing person's life may be in danger.
Later that afternoon, a friend of Robin's alerts the family of a news article that shows a black SUV surrounded by first responder vehicles. It looks just like Robin's vehicle, and a parent's worst nightmare is about to be confirmed. A female victim is found beside the vehicle, west of Amarillo, near the intersection of Helium Road and West County Road 34. She's been the victim of foul play. District Attorney James Farron is contacted.
It was standard practice for the Sheriff's Department to contact me if a homicide had occurred, and once Robin's body was discovered at 34th and Helium, they contacted me, and I was present and offering advice and suggestions throughout their investigation.
Authorities note strange pink color smears on Robin's car window.
They saw damage to the vehicle, contact marks. They saw scratches, they saw paint, transfer of paint.
Something hard, probably metallic, had been used to strike that window several times and cause chip marks, and there was a pink smear on the window.
Hard objects come in contact, especially in a scraping motion or hitting motion, you're going to have a transfer of paint if there's paint on that particular object.
No wallet or phone is found on the victim, who shows the signs of having engaged in a struggle.
It was obvious that she had suffered several serious blows to her head and neck and face area.
When you see that, you look, well, this person looked like they were beat up. She looks like she was beat up.
She had injuries that were consistent with several blows to her head and face. They believe she had died as a result of blunt force trauma.
This appears to be a clear-cut case of a robbery gone wrong.
Robin's wallet was missing and her cell phone was missing when the investigation began. Whoever killed Robin took her wallet and her phone. We didn't know whether, was this a robbery? Was this just a random event out on Helium Road? By mid-afternoon, the sheriff's department had contacted her parents, and her parents had confirmed that they believed that was Robin.
Police gather information from people who know Robin.
When a spouse or ex-spouse dies, one of the first people investigators look at is the spouse or ex-spouse, but other than just a general rule, they didn't have anything at that point to point to J.D. or Katie or anybody else. Katie indicated she didn't know anything other than what she'd heard from other people who'd called her. And J.D. told the same story, that he just didn't have any information that would be of help to them. He really didn't know anything about it.
In the days to follow, the Spielbauers make formal statements. J.D. tells investigators that after visiting with his uncle, he falls asleep on the couch.
Maybe 9:40-ish, 9:50 is that. Because I started sending text messages and calling. Because I sent one to my wife. She said, we're good, everything's okay. I was like, okay.
About 10:15, he calls Uncle Ty and wants him to come back over to the house. J.D. tells Uncle Ty in the garage that night, you know, I've got a bad feeling about Robin.
I just have an uneasy feeling this seemed to be by school.
J.D. then proceeds to send Robin a text at 10:18, asking if everyone is okay.
I didn't get a text or anything from her. I was like, okay. Tried calling her, got her voicemail. Like, all right, maybe she's busy sleeping, I don't know.
Police are satisfied at first.
Robin's cell phone was missing from the scene. However, the detectives were able to recover information from her service provider.
And in those text messages, it was obvious there was communication between J.D. and Robin, and that Robin believed they were going to meet that evening of the 7th. And so, for obvious reasons, they bring J.D. back into the sheriff's office and interview him and confront him with this text message information.
Police confront J.D. with the text messages from the missing cell phone that no one ever expected to see. Newlyweds Katie and J.D. have ever-escalating tension with J.D.'s ex-wife. Robin is found murdered in an apparent robbery gone wrong. Data recovered from Robin's cell service provider shows that she had a meeting planned with J.D. the night of her murder, contrary to what he tells police.
Did you have any plans to meet Robin Money evening?
No plans.
How do you explain these text messages? Let me read these to you in case your memory's failing you.
Police ask J.D. to explain the recovered text messages.
He concedes that he wasn't completely honest with them during the first conversation. That it's true, he was supposed to meet Robin that night, but the meeting was supposed to take place at his house, which is just 2 houses down from where Robin was living with her parents. He said that they were going to meet and talk about the upcoming school year and the children and visitation and the general agenda for the children, and that she stood him up. She never showed up.
You're the last person on this earth to have contact with her, and that contact was arranging a meeting that she made.
Yes, sir. And that makes me #1 suspect no matter what.
It leaves me wondering what happened.
Nothing. Leaves me wondering too, sir.
J.D. claims he has good reason to keep meetings with his ex-wife secret. Robin and his wife, Katie, notoriously hate each other since the divorce and marriage.
His further explanation was that bad blood had developed between Katie and Robin for obvious reasons. And so this meeting, according to J.D., was going to be at his house because Katie was going to be gone for the evening visiting a friend, and so it would be okay for Robin to come over. There wouldn't be a confrontation between Katie and Robin because Katie wasn't going to be home that evening.
The reason for the animosity is interesting to police.
It's understandable that Robin would feel hostility toward Katie. Katie's hostility toward Robin was actually caused by the same suspicion that Robin had. Katie had concluded that J.D. was now having an affair with Robin. He was married to Robin, had an affair with Katie. Now he's married to Katie, and Katie believes he's having an affair with Robin. And she is just hammering J.D. every day, not only in person, but later when we acquired her phone records, her text messages for 2 or 3 weeks prior to the murder were just endless attacks, diatribes against J.D. I know you're having an affair with Robin. I know you're cheating.
In fact, in the 4 days leading up to the murder, Katie sends J.D. no less than 336 angry text messages. Katie sends an ominous message. I'll take care of this myself. And J.D. appears to hint that he knows something about the murder.
Let me run a scenario by you. Katie's not stupid. She's pretty sharp. She finds out y'all are having a meeting that night. That's why she's pissed. That's why she's not at the house. You set the meeting up, and something really bad happened.
So you're basically either saying I did something personally or physically to my wife, or I know of something.
You know something. With my very soul, I believe you know what's going on here. The best I can do, giving you the benefit of every doubt I can possibly give you, is that you have some real deep frickin' suspicions that you don't want to discuss with me.
Sir, I do have a lot of suspicions.
He did know something about the night of the 7th and something about Robin and that they were supposed to meet. But his position was, whether he lied or whether he forgot, that the meeting never occurred, that she didn't show up.
But she did show up dead on Helium Road. Investigators believe that Robin dies as a result of blunt force trauma.
During the autopsy, they find a projectile inside her skull. They x-ray the body, of course. Ballistics comes up beautiful on an x-ray, and they see a projectile. They open the skull up, they retrieve the projectile. It's a small caliber at the time.
The bullet removed from Robin's skull is examined.
We get the projectile, we would weigh it. I could hold it in my hand and tell you that it's a .22 caliber. I would then reaffirm from experience, I would throw it on the scale, check the weight, It could be a .22 caliber pistol, or it could be a .22 caliber rifle. You know, there's two types of firearms, several types of firearms that fire that particular caliber.
The slug recovered from Robin's brain is too deformed to perform thorough ballistic testing upon it.
Detectives went back to the scene where the body and vehicle were located and searched for a casing.
Took a large area around where the vehicle and body were, and they marked it off in grids with strings and stakes. They sifted through every square inch of that soil, and they recovered two broken pieces off of what looked like off of a firearm. And they also recovered a .22 caliber shell casing.
Authorities now hunt for the murder weapon.
They start looking on social media, they start looking, conducting search warrants, they start confiscating different firearms or people involved, and they seem to see this one particular gun that grabs their eye.
They find photos on social media of Katie shooting a pink gun, but then Katie removes them.
Now the Sheriff's Department and I realize that it is likely that if we get a search warrant for J.D. and Katie's house, the gun that killed Robin might be there.
When they went to the house, they were armed with information. They knew what they were looking for.
Authorities entered the Spielbauer house.
The Sheriff's Department during the search recovered probably 15 or 20 guns, several rifles, shotguns, but several pistols. Next to Katie's side of the bed in a nightstand, they recovered a 9mm, as I recall.
And they find a .22 caliber. You know, at the time, it's a .22 caliber. We're looking for a .22 caliber. When they recovered it, they says, wait a minute. There's pink on that gun, and we have pink on the vehicle.
The pink gun is examined by a forensic officer.
Also, the gun had damage to it. It's a polymer gun. The top of it's aluminum alloy. You know, there was pieces chipped off of it.
The pink paint samples from the crime scene match Katie's pink gun.
Eventually, the investigation determined that they were likely caused by that gun striking against the window while the window was rolled up. Obviously, this is intriguing, and obviously to the investigators and to me, this seemed like it would be important. If Robin were cowering inside the vehicle with the window up, and her assailant is beating on the window with that gun, trying to get her to open the window, and left that pink polymer smear on the window, now we know a lot more about what was happening out at Helium Road than we did before.
Suspect weapons will be test fired to get reference casings and projectiles to compare to the evidence from the scene. We do these comparisons using a comparison microscope, which is basically two microscopes joined by an optical bridge. So we can look at the test fires and compare them to the evidence from the scene.
In a semi-automatic, the casing can be just as important in identifying the firearm. When that casing is extracted from the semi-automatic, it leaves extraction marks on the casing that are unique to that gun. Fairly quickly, ballistics was able to match the shell casing recovered out at the scene to that .22. And the gun belonged to Katie. And nobody else ever used this gun, only Katie. There were pictures of her all over Facebook firing the gun. There were pictures of her teaching her children how to target practice using that gun. Everybody knew that was her gun.
With a clear match to her gun, Katie is brought in for questioning.
No, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I liked her, because I didn't. But my father died when I was 2. I buried my mother when I was 18 years old. I know what it feels like to grow up without a parent. I would never do that to anybody. I'm not a murderer. I may be a lot of things, but I'm not a murderer.
Her text messages, however, seem to tell another story.
On the 7th, the last communication she had with J.D. was a text message in which, again, about 3 o'clock, she accuses J.D. again of having an affair with Robin. He denies it again, and she says, I'll take care of this myself. I'll put an end to it. 7, 8 hours later, Robin's dead with a bullet in her brain, and so it was easy to think, well, I guess she took care of it.
JD tells investigators his version of events.
Got in the back seat with her and we was talking about the girls, the STARS test coming up.
JD put Katie at the scene of the murder. Eventually, he admits he went out to Helium Road and 34th to meet Robin. He claims that Katie then showed up and caught them there together.
A few moments later, hear a tapping on the glass. End up opening the door and I see Katie there, which took me by surprise.
And that's the last time JD says he sees Robin alive. Robin Spielbauer is murdered, and her ex-husband JD lies to police about their meeting on the night of her murder.
So JD changes his story again and tells police that he did go to Helium Road on the night of Robin's murder. However, he was just talking to Robin about the kids. He states that Robin was still alive when he left the scene.
But Katie's furious texts seem to tell a tale of murder. In JD's telling of events, he leaves his uncle and goes to Helium Road to speak with Robin. But there's more. JD says Katie shows up unexpectedly.
They're bickering back at each other. I'm trying to stop the bickering. I just put my foot down and say this isn't what it looks like. We're talking about the girls. That's it. She says something along the lines of, yeah, I don't give a. I'll turn to Katie. I'll tell her, just give me a car. Let's go on. Put the foot down. This is done. I'll shut her door. And I'll go walking back to my truck.
He says, well, by the way, those chip marks on the window, that didn't happen while I was there. That had to have happened after I left because there weren't any chip marks on the window when I left.
Katie attests she and her son Diego spend the evening with friends and leave about 10:13. However, Katie's best friend can't confirm that. She believes Katie left at 9:50, which would give Katie time to kill Robin.
JD tells the police that he originally lied because he thinks that Katie may have killed Robin and he wanted to protect her.
Forgive me for if I ended up misleading anybody. I was hoping that this wasn't true. Seriously. I still love Katie with everything I got.
Katie, however, is starting to have suspicions of her own.
I don't know. I'm starting to think maybe JD did it.
Katie demands a polygraph test to prove her innocence. With her pink gun established as the murder weapon, and her husband's eyewitness testimony against her, this is a last-ditch attempt by Katie.
Polygraphs are not admissible in most criminal courts. However, police often use them as investigative aids to help include or exclude suspects.
Katie fails not one, but 2 polygraph tests. The case against her stacks higher and higher. Authorities trace Katie's cell phone and discover the night of the murder, it registers a ping off a cell phone tower.
The digital information we get from a ping tells us whether you're checking your voicemail or whether you're having a conversation or what it is you're doing on the phone. It tells us what time it took place. And it tells us you're within the range of the cell tower.
The information places Katie in a location and timeline that indicates she could have been leaving the scene of the murder.
And so when we added all that up, and the sheriff's department brought me all of that information, I filed a murder charge against Katie Spielbauer.
Katie steadfastly maintains her innocence.
I did not do this.
So you have nothing to offer?
That's not true. I don't know.
She was arrested and charged with the murder of Robin Spielbauer. After Katie had been sitting in jail for about a year, waiting trial, charged with the murder of Robin. One of the secretaries in my office mentioned that she had seen a fascinating show on television the night before, and it had to do with Wi-Fi tracking of cell phones. And we asked her, said, "Now you mean cell towers?" And she said, "No, this is different. This Wi-Fi tracking can give you the location of a cell phone down to about 30 meters. Well, this was total news to me.
Authorities reinterpret the Wi-Fi data from the night of the murder and come to a shocking conclusion.
When I got all of this information, and I talked to a dozen different experts, I realized I'd locked up the wrong person. Sorry.
July 20th, 2015, I got a call from my attorney, and he said, "Katie, Mr. Farron wants to speak with you tomorrow, and when he gets there, I need you to just sit down and be quiet." So then Mr. Farron came down to the jail, and then he turned to me and he said, "I got the phone records back." I said, "It's about time." He said, "You were never on Helium Road." I said, "I've been telling you that for 15 and a half months. He said, "Today I'm going to dismiss your case." And I fell out of the chair and I hit my knees and I started thanking God and praying and crying.
It was gut-wrenching. I wanted to personally apologize to her and tell her we were going to do everything we could to make it right.
With Katie innocent, suspicion immediately falls upon JD.
I was so angry, but at some point I had to make the decision. If he was able to kill Miss Spielbauer #1, and he was able to frame Miss Spielbauer #2, what's he going to do to Miss Spielbauer #3? It took some time to heal and get over the anger, but eventually I told Farron, "Whatever you need, I will help you."
Authorities now listen to what Katie has to say about JD. The day after Robin's murder, Katie confronts JD.
And I said, "You know, what did you do? What did you do?" And he looked at me and he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." I said, "Yes, you do. You know exactly what I'm talking about. What did you do?" And it went from JD to somebody I've never seen before. And he grabbed me by the throat and he pushed me up against the wall and he got right in my face and he said, "I handled the problem." And I just turned ice cold. And his eyes went from this demonic darkness back to JD, and you could see it in his eyes. He thought, "Oh my gosh, why did I say that? Now she knows. Now she knows." And I just looked at him. "What do you mean you handled the problem?"
JD's a clever man. He's a very clever individual. I've tried 6 capital murder trials, but this is the most amazing case of my career.
JD Spielbauer implicates his wife, Katie Spielbauer, as the killer of his ex-wife, Robin. Katie sits in jail awaiting trial for 467 days. But when the DA's secretary learns about new technology for tracing cell phone signals, Katie is cleared of suspicion and set free. Authorities look for clues with fresh eyes and a new suspect.
As Sherlock Holmes says, when you've eliminated every other possibility, whatever's left has to be the truth.
And finally I said to them, "You're telling me that not one single business in that area has cameras?" And that's when they went and found the video footage from the ATM where they saw Robin's car, go, and then they saw JD's truck, and then they saw JD's truck come back.
Surveillance video from a bank shows Robin Spielbauer driving past an Amarillo National Bank branch at 9:21 p.m. en route to the scene of the murder. It also shows J.D. Spielbauer driving past at 9:27 p.m. and driving back the other way at 9:50 p.m. As investigators search for more evidence against J.D., one of J.D.'s ex-girlfriends has more to say than she initially let on.
We actually interviewed her 3 times because our original source kept saying she's not telling you everything she knows, she's just afraid of J.D. We finally brought her back the 3rd time and under threat of a grand jury subpoena, and she said, all right, I'll tell you, but you've got to protect me from J.D.
To the astonishment of authorities, the woman speaks with J.D. just days before Robin's murder.
They sit out on the front porch of her grandmother's house where she lived, and J.D. tells her about his problems with Robin and Katie, and how Robin is just driving him nuts about child support and visitation, and they're having all kinds of problems, and he would just be better off if she were out of their lives. In fact, the best thing that could happen would be for her to have a bullet in her brain. And 5 days later, she had a bullet in her brain.
Not only is the testimony incriminating, it also points to a pattern of behavior in J.D.'s relationships.
I was his property. He told me where I could go, what I could wear. If he didn't want me to leave the house, he would take fuses out of my car.
Eventually, in the course of the investigation of the murder of Robin Spielbauer, J.D. Spielbauer gave 4 different versions of what happened that night.
J.D. has left a trail of clues that let investigators know he's anything but innocent. Finally, authorities are able to put the pieces together.
In his 4th version, his lie, he says, well, by the way, those chip marks on the window, that didn't happen while I was there. That had to have happened after I left because there weren't any chip marks on the window when I left.
He claimed that he saw the marks while the vehicle was parked at the sheriff's office for processing.
So I contacted the sheriff's department, and they started laughing. And I said, what is so funny? And they said, we took that window out of the vehicle and sent it to the lab in Lubbock. It's been in the lab in Lubbock 120 miles away since the day after the investigation started. So unless he can see from here to Lubbock, he didn't see any chip marks on the window at the sheriff's department.
As police revisit the evidence they had collected from the initial investigation, more and more clues fall into place.
When they executed the search warrant on the house, JD's standing there next to me and he says, you know they're going to take all of our guns, right? He was so nervous about that.
Now, at the time, nobody thought that was important. But looking back later, how did JD know they were going to look for guns? Everybody thought Robin died from blunt force trauma. Why would they be looking for guns? The only person who knew a gun would be important was the person that killed her.
We had approximately 8 firearms in the house. The only gun that was registered to me, the only one that I ever actually purchased, was a pink .22. Every time we would take it to the shooting range, it would jam.
From the very beginning, I should have been puzzled as to why would Katie take a gun that malfunctions all the time out to kill Robin when she had a wonderful 9mm that works perfectly well? And it's a larger caliber, much more effective if you want to kill somebody. If it's Katie that killed Robin, it doesn't make much sense. But if it's J.D., it makes all the sense in the world. He knows that everybody knows the .22 is Katie's gun.
Finally, another piece of evidence falls into place.
We learned during the investigation that Robin carried in her wallet her own Social Security card and the Social Security card of her 2 children. Eventually, we knew those were the only Social Security cards ever issued for those 2 children. During the search of J.D.'s truck, The deputy found inside his console 2 Social Security cards, the Social Security cards of J.D. and Robin's 2 children. If Robin always carried those Social Security cards in her wallet, how did they end up in J.D.'s truck?
How indeed, unless J.D. is with Robin the night of her murder. For the murder of his ex-wife, Robin Spielbauer, Jeremy Spielbauer is sentenced to life in prison with parole eligibility in 2046.
We want to get the bad guys and protect the good guys. It is our worst nightmare that we lock up the wrong person. But Katie spent 467 days locked in a cell because I ignored evidence that was available. I just didn't look at it close enough. I didn't look at it with an open mind.
But in the end, the evidence saves Katie. She goes on to earn a degree in legal studies.
When I was released from jail, I immediately started school. I'm the first person in my family to graduate college. I got a bachelor's degree in legal studies, and I work as a defense paralegal for a wonderful attorney here in town.
Now divorced from J.D. Spielbauer, she vows to work to help those who are wrongly accused.
I am also the director of strategy for a nonprofit called Ignite You First. Our goal is to break generational cycles of trauma and to build hope in people who have been through anything that could be considered a traumatic event.
Katie's a good person at heart. I'll never pass up an opportunity to tell the world that I made a mistake and she's innocent. She had nothing to do with the death of Robin Spielbauer.
Even the quietest towns have their secrets to hide. A neighborhood full of family doesn't mean it's always safe.
There's blood on the bed. He's gurgling all the stuff out of his mouth.
The first thing I think they noticed when they were walking up where the guns lined up along the sidewalk.
Robinson Police.
The police found when they arrived what looked like a burglary situation.
No lie stays hidden forever, and the evidence always finds the truth. Just south of Waco, Texas, is the small suburban area of Robinson.
Robinson is a suburb of Waco, and just your quintessential bedroom community, as the people call them. They're very close-knit.
The two cities are right together. It's basically a residential area with some shops and a little bit of business.
You have the small town feel, but close enough to a bigger town with bigger amenities in it.
A lot of good folks live there, small school, very tight-knit community.
But even the smallest towns can have their dark side.
Robinson 911, what's your emergency? Hello? Okay. What's the problem? I got up this morning. I was in my son's room because I didn't sleep. My back door was open. My husband's guns are all gone. And there's blood on the bed and he is struggling all the stuff out of his mouth. Okay, so he is there? He's here. Stay on line with me. Hang on one second. I'm going to dispatch officer. Stay on. I do have officers in around. You don't see anybody. I mean, like there's nobody around or anything, do you? I don't see anything. This back door was wide open. I went back there, turned on the lamp, and I shut the door. And then I heard my husband put my hair on. Anything conscious, ma'am? I can't put it to respond. Good. And he is breathing? I can see his breathing.
In the morning hours of around 6 o'clock, a woman named Gentry called in to 911 and said that her husband had a gunshot wound in the head and blood all over.
The police are quick to arrive on the scene, showing up even before Darlene gets off the phone with the 911 operator.
Robinson Police.
I'm sorry, what?
The police found when they arrived what looked like a burglary situation. Mr. Gentry was in bed, and he had received a gunshot wound to the head.
With nothing else left to do, Darlene Gentry is left to wait and hope that her husband Keith will survive.
Darlene and Keith Gentry were a young married couple with children living in the city limits of Robinson, Texas.
She was a homecoming queen at Cameron, a city near Waco. Keith and she met at Texas State Technical Institute, a school, and they dated off and on while they were in school, and then both of them got out and left. She went up to Dallas, but then moved back, and they continued dating and finally got married. They, in pretty short order, had 3 children.
Keith was a hard-working guy. I worked for a drafting company. He lived near his folks, a very close-knit family.
Keith's father, Wayman, said that Keith didn't appear to be very happy and that he was going to stick it out with her, but it seemed like that they were having difficulties.
Darlene originally studies to be a dental assistant and moves to Dallas to work for a dentist. But after an incident where her car is stolen, she decides to move back home and goes back to school to get a nursing degree.
You know, the fact that she was a homecoming queen, she was an exceptionally attractive young woman.
Keith proposes to Darlene in 1999, and their wedding is soon after. As their lives together in marriage truly begin, they move into a house next door to Keith's parents. In the early morning of November 9th, 2005, Darlene is the first in her house to stir. She wakes up in one of her children's rooms after spending the night trying to help them sleep by watching movies together.
The children were sick, that she had been staying with them during the night, and that she got up early in the morning and started going around the house, and the back door was open, and that Keith's guns were missing.
Darlene races from the open gun cabinet to find Keith, all the while calling out his name.
And so then she went into the bedroom and found her husband, Keith, lying there with blood and a bullet wound in his head.
When Darlene finds her husband mortally wounded in their bed, she calls 911 for help.
911, what's your emergency? There's blood on the bed and she is struggling.
Police arrive at the scene within minutes. Immediately upon reaching the house, things start to look off.
Go check the inside. Go check the guy. Watch yourself going in. We've got a lot of guns here in the front yard. Robinson Police.
I'm sorry, what?
Stand right here and just keep scanning. Don't let anybody near them guns.
Well, the first thing I think they noticed when they were walking up were the guns lined up along the sidewalk.
Keith Gentry had several hunting-type weapons, long guns, shotguns, rifles, and they were kind of out in the grass in the front yard, and they were kind of lined up in rows. And there wasn't but about maybe 5 or 6 of these.
Keith is in critical condition and is treated as the first priority before any investigation into the scene can begin.
This is not a high-crime area by any stretch of the imagination. And to make that point even more profound is that where they lived in particular is surrounded by family, almost like a family compound. And none of what we were being told about the crime scene made sense.
Keith is taken to the hospital. Every second could mean the difference between life and death.
The gun case was open, but it was unlocked with a key.
When doing an inventory of the guns, found out that one was in fact missing. That didn't match anything that they had ever seen about a robbery.
It just did not sound to the Robinson Police Department like she was as concerned.
They called and said that Keith was not doing well, that maybe she needed to get to the hospital.
In the small suburb of Robinson, Texas, residents feel safe and secure in their tight-knit community. On an early November morning, the Gentry family learns that tragedy can strike anywhere, even when surrounded by family. Darlene Gentry wakes up to find her back door open and gun cabinet empty. She fears a burglar has gotten into her house in the night. Darlene finds her husband Keith in their bed, barely holding on to his life, with a bullet wound in his head. She calls 911, but can Keith survive?
Keith Gentry was transported to the hospital. The police then talked to Darlene and asked her to come down to the headquarters with them.
Darlene is brought to the police station to give her statement about the events of the morning.
Just as a matter of routine, Darlene was taken to the Robinson Police Department where she was being interviewed by police detectives.
Saw the blood on the sheets. Was there any weapons on the bed?
I honestly saw nothing other than just the foam coming out of his mouth, and I tried to shake him. When I tried to shake him, and that's when I noticed something by his head, and I kind of leaned in more to look, and that's when I went to hollering at the kids, get out, get out, get out.
What did you see?
I just saw the red, and I automatically assumed it was blood just because, and so that's when I started calling, and it was just like I don't know.
While Keith is taken to the hospital and Darlene is interviewed, the police investigate the scene of the crime, on the lookout for any evidence of the burglary.
When the Robinson police detectives arrived, they called in the Texas Rangers.
Her story, of course, was it was a robbery. There was no evidence of a break-in. She said the guns had been stolen. There was no evidence that the gun case had been broken into, and nothing else was taken. And then to find the firearms stacked rather neatly on the lawn in front of the house that didn't match anything that they had ever seen about a robbery.
Did you at any time touch him?
Well, I know I physically did. Like I shook his leg when I was trying to get his attention, but phone's in my pocket. I just turned it on.
The reason I asked is we got some rangers at the house, some Texas Rangers. They're assisting with the crime scene stuff. They found what they think might be blood in the bathroom sink.
I don't know. As I said, I haven't, other than touching his leg, that is the only part I believe I touched of him.
So you don't remember going
after touching maybe any bloody area?
No, I was literally, my cell phone was on my dresser, which is on his side of the bed. When I couldn't get him to respond to me, I turned directly from there, picked up the phone and, turned it on, and then, of course, had to wait for the service to hit 911.
The gun case was open, but it was unlocked with a key.
As authorities make their way through the house, questions about Darlene's story begin to percolate in their minds. And it isn't only the evidence found around the house that has them wondering.
The officers and their experience, even people with no medical training, try to at least do something to help a wounded spouse or a person. She had done nothing. She gave a story that she was probably in shock or something like that, but the fact that she did nothing was very suspicious to them.
Is Darlene too in shock to help her husband? Or could her inaction be a sign that something else is going on?
Keep in mind, a 911 operator is going to want her to do CPR because that's just how they're trained to do. And keeping also in mind that Darlene was a registered nurse at the time. But in order to properly do CPR, you have to pull someone off the bed because you cannot adequately do CPR in bed. You need to have a hard surface. But she never did that. She spoke to the dispatcher, the 911 operator, about how he was making a gurgling sound, and it just did not sound to the Robinson Police Department like she was as concerned or as frantic as what a normal spouse might have been when they found their husband dead in bed.
The search continues through the house, but as hard as they try, police can't find definitive evidence of any break-in having occurred.
I don't recall how long we had been there, but we'd been there quite a while because we were having to go from room to room. We have to search and look, and we were looking for fingerprints. We were looking for all evidence that might have bolstered what the wife had told us about the burglary, but we just could not find it.
That was my partner again. The detective I got at the hospital said that they need the wife there to make some medical decisions on behalf of your husband. Okay, so what I'm going to do, if you'll just bear with me just a few more minutes, I'm going to get you to the hospital until I can sort through what's going on. Noreen, you listening to me?
Yes, I'm listening.
Everyone's a suspect right now until I can determine how your husband suffered this gunshot wound. That's not to take away that he could have done it himself. You understand this?
Yes.
If there was a gun on that bed, you moved it to save his integrity or anything like that, I need to know now.
I did not move a gun.
Did you harm your husband?
No, I did not harm my husband.
You and I have been working, we've built a pretty good relationship here. I'm trying to figure out what happened.
I know.
That's all I'm trying to do right now.
Darlene was in the middle of her initial police interview down at the police station, and they called and said that Keith was not doing well and maybe she needed to get to the hospital.
Darlene's interview isn't over, but the police put it on hold after news of Keith's condition reaches the station.
They received a message from the hospital that her husband, Keith, was brain dead, and then took her to the hospital, and she signed the paperwork so that he would not be kept on life support.
Darlene is given time to sign the paperwork and say her goodbyes, but after things conclude at the hospital, she is brought back to the police department to continue her interview.
I'm just not doing this alone because I'm just...
Are you saying that you want to get an attorney?
Yes.
Okay.
So my sisters are having a fit. They don't want me signing anything.
They continued to talk with her later in the day, and she began to feel that she was being interrogated and eventually invoked her right to cease the interrogation and leave.
I'm just afraid that I'm going to get, I'm trying to tell y'all exactly what I remember, and as I said, it's been a long day.
Sure.
And I'm just,
I understand.
I don't want me trying to tell y'all something to turn around and it come out not exactly what I meant and basically bite me in the butt. Basically, is what I don't want to happen.
And we wouldn't let that happen to you, because if there's something we don't understand that you've said, we're going to ask you.
And I've tried to be straightforward and honest with everything that I'm telling y'all. And what I don't know, I'm telling you, I don't know.
Darlene Gentry wakes up early on a November morning. She finds the door open and the gun cabinet unlocked. She races to her husband Keith, but finds him shot in their bed. Keith is rushed to the hospital, but it isn't enough. When Darlene is told that he has been left brain dead, she signs off on removing him from life support. The Texas Rangers are brought in to investigate the burglary, but details aren't matching up. And when Darlene starts to feel interrogated, she asks for a lawyer and leaves the police station. Before Darlene gets back from the police station, the investigation in and around her home continues.
We did believe that one handgun was missing, and we searched for the handgun. We could not find it.
Later, when doing an inventory of the guns, found out that one of his guns was in fact missing. It was a .22 caliber 9-shot revolver. That was the only firearm in the house that could not be accounted for.
Police are able to talk to Keith's father to get more insight into the guns found in the front yard, confirming the missing gun's existence.
The father had given the gun to Keith, knew that he had it, and so they were able to make the determination that that gun was missing.
Meanwhile, one officer makes a very lucky discovery inside the house.
We assisted the Robinson Police Department with the examination of the crime scene, and through this investigation, one of the key pieces of evidence found by Robinson Police Detective Mike Noel was, as he was going through the kitchen trash can, he found a latex surgical glove.
The police requested that she would give them permission to search her house, which she did, and they found a latex glove similar to what a nurse would wear, and inside the glove was a .22 caliber shell that would have fit the revolver.
Now keep in mind, this glove was turned inside out as if it was being worn at the time when the shell casing was picked up. Turned inside out and then placed at the bottom of the trash can, and then what looked like a bunch of leftover food was piled on top of it, as if to hide the surgical glove and the shell casing.
The glove was taken to the crime lab along with the shell. They did DNA on it, and the DNA on the glove matched the DNA of Darlene Gentry. The glove was subsequently tested for gunshot residue, and it was found on it. Interestingly, the defense attorneys asked for that test to be run on it.
As for the bullet shell, firearms experts are able to confirm that the shell would come from the missing .22 caliber revolver. Although without the gun in question, there can be no way of connecting the two beyond it being just a possibility.
There was an autopsy done. The bullet was recovered from his head. The bullet was so badly damaged that they were not able to match it to the gun as far as being fired from the gun, but it was a .22 bullet and consistent with what could have been fired from that gun.
Between the lack of evidence of a burglary having taken place and the shell found in the latex glove, suspicion grows in Darlene's direction. But for some police officers, these suspicions begin much sooner.
Something stinks about this, Gary. I think she did it. Something ain't right here, man. I'm telling you.
Okay, what's the problem? I got up this morning. I was in my son's room because I didn't sleep. My back door was open. My husband's guns are all gone.
The interesting thing about the call was that was the order that everything was described to the 911 operator. Normally, if a person comes in and finds their spouse, mortally wounded, that's the first thing they're going to tell the operator. My husband is badly hurt. We need an ambulance out here. And instead, she went through this long scenario about walking around the house and the guns being missing, and the last thing that she got to was about her husband. And that made everybody very suspicious. It sounded like she was setting up an alibi in her call.
Oh, by the way, my husband's been shot. So it's almost like we call it in the newspaper business, she kind of buried the lead. But it appeared to the investigators early on that she was trying to set up her alibi, or, she went way in too much detail before she actually said, "Oh, my husband's been shot."
If Darlene could be responsible, there is still the question of why hanging in the air.
Keith and Darlene did have some financial problems. There were apparently other problems in the marriage as well. Keith had a fairly large insurance policy. I believe he may have actually had two of them, and it was in the area, I believe, of several $100,000.
You mentioned y'all were trying to save some money. Have y'all been having some financial problems?
Well, we're just, this third kid, and it's killing us, basically. So we've just been trying to butt heads to figure out which way, because, of course, we are getting behind on some bills, and it's just been one thing after another.
Police are able to uncover that Keith is under 2 life insurance policies. Together, they are worth approximately $750,000.
Darlene Gentry's behavior continued to be confusing. She started looking for land to purchase, and she was looking in an area of the county that was about as far away as you could get and still be inside the county. And it wasn't her home. It wasn't where she was used to living. It was a very rural area, and it would have been a long drive for her to go to work every day. But she was dealing with one man who was selling a 5-acre tract of land.
Shortly after her husband's death, there was a gentleman named Pavelka who she had been friendly with, and told him that she would like to move and was looking for a house. He had a house that next to it was a little pond, and she expressed a great deal of interest in the house and the pond, said that her husband had always liked to take the boys out to water sports, and that she thought it would really be nice to have this house with the pond.
Darlene realized it had a pond on it, and she go, "Well, that's perfect, because Keith had always wanted a place with a pond so he could take his 3 sons fishing."
So they negotiated prices, and she would come out and look at the land from time to time, and she asked his permission, would it be okay if she spent a little time out there? He says, it's not a problem. Drive out and look at it anytime you like.
With the murder weapon still missing, there is no direct evidence to link anyone to the shooting of Keith Gentry. But as the circumstantial case continues to build, authorities believe Darlene is to blame. Nearly a month after Keith is shot, the police move to make an arrest.
I believe the crime occurred on November the 7th, and she was actually arrested November the 28th. Keith's father said they simply couldn't believe that she had done that.
Darlene Gentry told the man she wanted to buy the land, but she didn't want the pond anymore.
That kind of set in motion this scheme that the ranger had, so that she would go back out there.
The rangers then had set up a camera on the pond so a video could be recorded of what was happening there.
When Keith Gentry is shot in the middle of the night, the police begin to suspect Darlene, his wife, may be responsible.
Something stinks about this, Gary. I think she did it.
While their suspicions begin early on, the lack of a clear motive and the missing murder weapon keep them from closing the case. Meanwhile, Darlene looks for a new place to make a home, telling friends her current house is too full of awful memories after the shooting. While searching the Gentry residence, police find a spent shell casing for a .22 hiding inside a latex glove with Darlene's DNA. An arrest warrant is finally permitted, and Darlene is brought into custody nearly a month after Keith's death. But Darlene's arrest is short-lived.
Well, after she was arrested, Wayman Gentry, Keith's father, said that they simply couldn't believe that she had done that, and they were supportive of her and even helped her raise bail money.
Keith's parents raised the $50,000 necessary to get Darlene out on bail. When released from jail, Darlene pushes forward on buying the land she'd been shown before her arrest, only now she has an unusual request.
At some point during their negotiation, Darlene Gentry told the man she wanted to buy the land, but she didn't want the pond anymore. And the man thought that was strange because in Texas, anyone who buys a piece of property, they want water on it. Water is a commodity in Texas. So he was very confused about this, but he knew that she had also been arrested. So he contacted law enforcement and said, this woman who was arrested for killing her husband wants to buy my property. She wanted this pond, talked about how it was something she always wanted, but now she wants me to fill it in with dirt. He said, do you reckon she threw something into that pond? Well, we interviewed the man who owned the land, and we agreed that her behavior was suspicious at best. And we asked the man if it would be all right if we came out and looked in the pond. So myself and Ranger Foster, we contacted the state dive team. We made arrangements for them to come out and search the bottom of this body of water. It wasn't large, but it was big enough that it needed to be searched correctly. The dive team never even had to suit up. They waded out into the water. They saw what looked like maybe a stick in the water. They walked over to that stick about knee deep. They reached down and they pulled out a .22 caliber pistol.
In fairly short order, he was able to find a 9-shot .22 caliber revolver there in the water.
Within only 10 to 15 minutes, the dive team are able to locate the assumed murder weapon within the pond.
To begin with, the pistol itself was pristine. It was not covered in dirt or moss. It had not been there very long, and that was plainly obvious to all involved. We showed the weapon to Mr. Gentry, Keith Gentry's father, and he was able to positively identify it as a weapon that he had given his son at some point in time. So we now know that this is most likely the weapon that was missing from the house and probably the murder weapon.
With the bullet removed from Keith being too damaged to have an absolute confirmation that it must have been fired from a particular gun, authorities are left with only circumstantial evidence to link the gun to the shooting. It's the only gun missing from the Gentry residence after the shooting, matches the caliber of the bullet and appears to have only been recently disposed of. Having found the missing firearm in a place where the evidence points most clearly to Darlene, the idea of what must have happened on the night of the shooting crystallizes in the minds of police. With no evidence of a break-in actually having occurred, Darlene is the only one who appears to have had the means to have gotten to the guns. Darlene may have put most of the guns on the lawn to create confusion, and interest in the pond could potentially be due to a plan to dispose of the murder weapon. Even as police and Texas Rangers come up with what they believe must have happened, they still have nothing concrete to say Darlene has to have been involved.
And I came up with the idea to tell the landowner, to tell Miss Gentry, that he would be willing to fill in that pond with dirt, but that he would be afraid that he would get his tractor stuck. So he was going to use a pump and drain the water out first.
That kind of set in motion this scheme that the ranger had, and just to plain a hunch that she would go back out there and try to find the gun.
The Rangers then had set up a camera on the pond so a video could be recorded of what was happening there.
6:06. We told her on one day, as I recall, and by the next day, about noon, she had driven out there by herself. We watched her put on rubber boots and reach into the back of her vehicle and get a probe of some sort. Then we turned the cameras on and watched her walk down the path to the pond, walk over to where the stick had been placed earlier, and start probing around in the water looking for something. And of course we knew what it was. She was looking for the weapon.
All of this was recorded, and her efforts to dig around in the pond with the stick were all videotaped and were absolutely on record.
With the video evidence of Darlene searching out the discarded pistol, the police have what they need to put this case to rest.
Robinson 911, what's your emergency?
It all starts with a 911 call from a scared wife reporting a burglary and her husband being shot. But as the authorities look into her story, they discover how full of lies it truly is. When the probable murder weapon is found in a pond, a sting operation is put together to link Darlene to the crime. The sting works, and Texas Rangers have video evidence of Darlene trying to retrieve the gun.
Darlene's case went to trial in February 2007, and it was a high-profile case. Lots of people jammed the courtroom, a lot of friends and family on both sides, but mainly Keith's side. Darlene's mother was there.
The thing is, it was a circumstantial case. Nobody could point at her and say they had seen her shoot her husband, Keith Gentry. Anytime a case is circumstantial, you always have some concern, as a jury going to convict somebody if you don't have eyewitness testimony. We felt that we had a strong case. The 911 call just went against all human experience. Nobody goes through a convoluted story about getting up and walking around and things being stolen and then wandering into a bedroom.
I got up this morning, I was in my son's room because I didn't sleep. That door was open, my husband's guns are all gone, and there's blood on the bed and she's struggling.
Then and only then saying, my husband's got a bullet wound in his head. Our life experience says that when somebody finds their spouse terribly wounded, first thing they're going to do is call and say, you know, my spouse is terribly hurt and I need an ambulance here as quickly as possible, which is exactly what she didn't do. Three things that were really strong for us and we felt confident about. The first was the lead-in, the 911 call. Then the fact that the missing gun was later found in the pond, and then she went out and was digging around trying to find it. You know, how would she ever have known that the gun was there if she had not been the one that shot him and then concealed the gun and then later threw it in the pond?
Later, her explanation was that she heard a rumor that the gun was there, and she wanted to be the one to find it and turn it into the police to help them find the real killer.
The interesting part of that is that the defense never even cross-examined on the video. They didn't talk about it. They just pretty much acted like it didn't happen.
After laying out all the evidence of Darlene's guilt, the question of why she did it still remains unanswered.
We were never able to make a determination that the killing was to get the policy. If it had been determined that that was the motive for the killing, it would have been a capital murder and she would have been possibly facing the death penalty. But there was no evidence that that was the motive for the killing. As defense attorneys will frequently do, tried to minimize everything that was negative toward her. They were trying to say that she was just sort of in shock at the house, and that's why she said what she did on the tape. Then with the gun, they played up, as we expected them to, that it was a circumstantial case, that no one had seen Darlene commit the crime. And then also, they tried to point the fingers somewhat at Pavelka and were trying to give the idea that maybe he's the one that had gotten hold of the gun and was trying to set her up for some reason.
After only 5 hours of deliberations, the jury reaches their conclusion. They find Darlene guilty of murder.
The final verdict in Darlene Gentry's trial was she was found guilty of the murder of her husband, Keith Gentry. She received about a 66 or so year sentence, and she's currently serving that sentence in state prison here in Texas.
Here in Texas, murder is a first-degree felony, and the punishment range is from 5 years to 99 years or life.
We believe that the verdict was just, and we believe that justice was served. Kind of a backstory to this is that she did not like the fact that we videotaped her looking for that weapon in that pond. It just wrecked her whole theory that she was an innocent victim also, and that she had nothing to do with this.
While Keith's parents don't want to believe at first that Darlene could be responsible for the death of their son, it is in part because of Keith's father identifying the gun that the case is able to be solved.
Through the course of seeing what the evidence was, they became convinced that she had, in fact, murdered their son. And, of course, they were very bitter, would be the right word about that. They wanted her to get the maximum, to be in prison, and also not to be able to have any contact with the grandchildren.
Keith's parents are given custody of their grandchildren after Darlene is found guilty.
She got exactly what she deserved. She took the life of a man who did nothing but love her. She took away the father of 2 little boys, and they took away the son to a mother and a father who loved him. And they had invested their whole life into this family, Keith and Darlene. So she is where she needs to be, and she'll be there until she's not so pretty anymore.
We were, of course, satisfied. We were ourselves convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that she was guilty. Of course,
I think the community thought it was just. I mean, if you kill your husband while he's sleeping, that's a pretty cold thing to do, and you should go to prison for a long time for that.
I'll say this. This is the perfect example of how law enforcement can work when they work together. The fact that her DNA was found on a glove wrapped around a shell casing that belonged to the weapon that was found in the water. That's just good, solid police work on the part of Mike Noel, who took it upon himself to get his hands dirty and get inside a trash can. And without that, and without the video, Darlene Gentry might have gotten away with this.
A community on the rise, filled with people looking to make a great life for themselves.
He was nice to everyone. He was very generous to his family, beloved by all.
When Eric loses contact with everyone in his life, his friends and family are quick to grow concerned.
He had not spoken to family in 2 days.
That was just highly unusual.
But for him, it's already too late. Silver Spring, Maryland, is a community located just north of Washington, D.C.
It was really up and coming. A lot of clubs, a lot of bars, a lot of brand new high-rise houses and apartment buildings, condominiums. It's a much younger crowd, a much more urban crowd, lots of metro access, lots of jobs available, very close to D.C. So it's a very sought-after area.
It's a very diverse community. It's kind of an urban area, even though we are a suburban community. It is literally only maybe a block and a half outside of the District of Columbia. It was a very trendy area.
Eric Samoa was charismatic. That was the number one word that a lot of people use to describe Eric. He worked at a luxury dealership in Bethesda, and he was a smooth talker. He was funny. He was the person everybody wanted to be around. He was the number one salesman at their dealership. He was the first one in. He was always the last one to leave. Everybody loved him.
Eric Simone was 34 years old. He was beloved by friends and coworkers. Eric made somewhere between $10,000 and $20,000 a month. He was a ladies' man. He was nice to everyone. He was very generous to his family, beloved by all. He was the kind of guy that kept contact with just about everybody that was part of his life, family and friends. He was very attentive to his customers, which led to his success in business. And, he was a very popular guy.
Eric is living it up. He has great relationships, an incredible job, and lives in style.
Apartment complex was one with a brand new facility surrounded by $750,000 condominiums to $1 million condominiums. Lots of shopping and dining you could walk to in this particular area. The building itself was very fancy. It had an indoor pool and workout facilities.
In spring of 2012, everyone in Eric's life suddenly loses all contact with him.
So at At that point, on June 6th of 2012, Eric had not shown up for work, and that was, of course, unusual for Eric. His manager was concerned. He had not spoken to family in 2 days. Eric was always very involved with his family. He talked with his sister, his friends a lot, and that was concerning to them that there was 2 days where basically he was unavailable.
And this is somebody who lived with his cell phone. It was absolutely essential to all of his personal relationships and the way he conducted his business. That's how he reached out to his customers. His phone went dead. That was just highly unusual. The work people were so concerned, they contacted his family and talked to his mom and his sister. And one of his sisters ultimately called Montgomery County Police and requested that the police do what we call a welfare check. Can you please go to the apartment, check to see if he's okay? They got together with the landlord who gave him the key.
Calling the police is usually thought of as something strictly for worst-case emergencies, but sometimes we're needed just to come into a situation and make sure everything's okay. A welfare check is something that can be critical when a person lives alone and suddenly loses contact.
When they went to the apartment, the first thing police noticed was a really awful smell. And Eric's apartment, though very luxurious in a high-rise, was small. So when they came in the front, you kind of immediately see this bedroom to the side. And that's where Eric's body was found, in bed, virtually looking undisturbed. All the lights off, the blinds shuttered. And Eric was actually hands tucked under his chin, his sheet tucked under between his hands, just as if he was peacefully sleeping. But obviously the police noticed that there was a bullet hole in his head. Initially, police thought that it was a suicide.
While police are conducting their welfare check in Eric's apartment, his family is down in the lobby waiting on news. By the time they are told what is happening, the investigation is leaning toward the theory that Eric has committed suicide.
That was the initial information that was relayed to his family. They were absolutely horrified by the suggestion that that was what would happen. They said he would never do that.
The initial theory that Eric must have committed suicide doesn't last very long after the scene of the crime is more thoroughly investigated.
That was backtracked on very quickly because the officers obviously conspicuously saw that there was no gun.
This was not a suicide. It was a homicide.
There was one shell casing found on the bed. It was a spent shell casing from a .380. No gun was located.
The medical examiner conducts an autopsy to confirm cause of death and look for any other possible forensic evidence which could help steer the investigation.
The mechanism for death in this case was a gunshot wound. The gunshot wound was to the high part of the front of his head, the temple. It appeared to be an execution, essentially, to us and to the police. And there was also a bullet that was recovered at the time of the autopsy inside of Eric's body.
There is very limited evidence at the crime scene, leaving ballistic evidence as the only lead to follow.
There appears to have been nothing stolen, nothing ransacked, so it also appeared that whoever got into his apartment was someone that he let in there. They didn't break in, and they apparently didn't come to steal anything because they didn't take anything.
With no apparent sign of theft or disruption to the apartment, we're left to believe that whoever is responsible is likely someone Eric knows. Someone he's close enough with that they either have their own key or he's comfortable with them spending the night.
With little else to go on, the police are left with only a .380 bullet shell to bring Eric's killer to justice. But will it be enough? Silver Spring, Maryland, is an up-and-coming community just north of Washington, D.C. Great for young professionals to build their lives. Eric Samoa is a successful car salesman, known for keeping in touch with everyone close to him and never having his phone too far from reach.
When Eric hasn't been heard from for 2 days straight, his family calls the police to do a welfare check, leading to the discovery that he has been murdered.
Later on in the investigation, it was very quickly realized that Eric's phone was missing. That was the only thing that was missing from the apartment, and there were valuables all around, his wallet, a watch. The only thing missing was the phone.
Eric's missing phone is considered especially curious because he's known for keeping in touch with everyone close to him. His lack of communication is exactly what tipped off his family and led them to have the police check on him. Why wouldn't his phone be in his apartment? Has whoever killed him taken it?
So at that point, the police, I think their first line of attack was Eric's life through that cell phone. They didn't have the phone. They were able to very quickly get cell phone records. And they were able to see when Eric was texting messages, where the phone was. They were looking for the phone's location. The phone was ultimately never found. And throughout those records, they were able to identify the people that Eric was in contact with on the last days of his death. Most of them were friends and family. Most of them were people that had reached out to the police that were concerned about the investigation and asking questions. The police, though, did quickly realize that there was one number that kind of kept coming up over and over again. It was a Mississippi number. And his family didn't know that he knew anyone from Mississippi.
The police focus on trying to identify the owner of this Mississippi number from Eric's cell phone records.
The police didn't know who this person was, so one of the detectives in the case decided to really just canvass the garage of the apartment complex to see if they could find a car from Mississippi. A lot of young people live in the area. We're close to D.C. A lot of people who only are in the D.C. area for a short period of time do live in Silver Spring. So the police thought, hey, maybe there was somebody from out of state that was here, and they were able to locate that car.
Tracing the license plate number reveals the name Katrina Ben, a woman who has recently moved into the building. With this information, the police are able to track her down and bring her in for an interview to ask her about her relationship with Eric.
So Katrina Ben was from Silver Creek, Mississippi. She was a very young, very attractive, very smart nurse. And by all accounts of people who knew her and previous employers, she was really good at what she did. Her patients really liked her. She ended up becoming a traveling nurse because she wanted to sort of see the country and see the world. And she was with a company that would staff her to 3-month sort of stints all around the country. So she moved very, very frequently, and she did get to do what she wanted. She got to see a lot of the country through her job.
She also was a very attractive young woman. Her families did have some concern. You know, as you might imagine, a young, attractive young woman who sort of a nomadic, moving around every 3 months from place to place. They had some concerns about that, but she loved it, and that's what she did. And she was apparently beloved by the patients that she cared for and had lots of close friends.
So Katrina and Eric actually met at the Viridian apartment. There was a community lounge on the 15th floor that was available to residents for parties and community functions. And during that time of the year was the NBA playoffs. And the apartment was organizing sort of playoff watch parties for the residents to go. She was wearing scrubs. He recognized her as a nurse. Eric was very entrepreneurial. He was always looking to kind of set up new companies, start a side hustle. And one of the things he was looking to do was start up a nursing staffing company. And she was also interested in that as well. So when he saw that she was in the healthcare field, they exchanged information related to potentially establishing a business relationship, but they also became quick friends as they were in this social group that was watching the NBA tournament.
That began a friendship that very, very quickly escalated into a sexual relationship between the two of them. During the 3 or 4 weeks, there were extensive text messaging that went back and forth between Eric and Katrina. And that text messaging began 3 or 4 weeks before, pretty benignly. Nice to meet you. Hey, handsome, how you doing? How's your day going? very benign things. It became very easy to see the rapid escalation in the nature of the relationship simply by reading the text messages. And it rapidly became sexual, and they openly talked about it in their exchanges on the text messages. And coming up to the night of the murder, if you read the text messages, you realized that she was supposed to come over to his apartment that night to watch, they were both mutual NBA fans. They were supposed to come over to watch a game in the apartment that evening.
I'm a basketball fan, and so is he. So that was our connection. The game was coming on that night, and he was like, we can watch it.
On Monday, June 4th of 2012, Eric Samoa and Katrina Bent made plans to watch an NBA playoff game. And Katrina was supposed to come to Eric's apartment to watch that game. Eric and her hung out that evening, but she herself would say that Eric just was not attentive to her. He was making phone calls, he was paying bills, he was online checking his email, and he even took her at some point to go to a drug dealer's to buy some marijuana.
Sometime in the second quarter, he said, I did something real stupid a couple of days ago. And I was like, what? He said, I smoked some weed. I was like, okay, whatever floats your boat. You know, I know people that smoke weed. I've never had any in my life. Feel free to take a blood sample, hair sample, whatever you need to do. I've never had any. I don't like to be around it, you know. And I kind of said something to that effect to him. I was kind of joking, but I was like, I work for the government. I ain't got time to be going down for no weed, you know. He was like, girl, please, I know somebody in the building, you know, I kind of want some. A few minutes later, he called someone, and he asked them 2 or 3 times, where are you at? Where are you at? Where are you at? And then he just hung up. I don't know if they hung up on him. I don't know.
As Katrina continues recounting the events of the night, this unknown person crops up again.
Beginning of the third quarter, he, I know this sounds so stupid, but for real, I just relate stuff to
I'm a
what quarter
basketball fan
it was.
too, so
you know, I don't know what time it was.
That would have been probably, the games usually last about 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking probably a little after 10.
Yeah,
10 and
it was.
10:30 then.
So whoever this was, he was speaking code, but I'm not stupid.
Right.
I know what 420 is.
What was the code?
You know, 420 is what I picked up on, but it was other I don't know what the hell he was saying. I'm not that cool. I don't know.
There absolutely was a contact between this marijuana dealer and Eric the night that he died. She went with him to the marijuana dealer's house, and they did buy drugs.
And she was able to give the police sort of very specific directions about the path they took to get to this drug dealer's house. Very detailed description of what he looks like, and she's able to describe the conversation between Eric and this drug dealer in great detail.
Eric and Katrina go back to his apartment after their drive. They watch the rest of the basketball game and eventually go to bed.
She is awoken in the night to hearing 2 men talking, and she recognizes that one of them is Eric, and she believes the other one of the men in the apartment is this drug dealer that she saw earlier. And she says she's sort of looking through a crack in the door, hearing this conversation.
When I woke up to him talking to somebody, and it was a guy, and he opened the bedroom door, he came in, and as he opened the door, I could see who I think is the guy from the apartment, like, walk by to go to the couch. So that's who he was talking to.
When Eric comes into the room to see Katrina, he has been smoking marijuana. She doesn't want to risk smelling like it herself and tells him she doesn't want to be near him.
And she kind of says she feels uncomfortable. She doesn't really know what's going on. She doesn't want to be there. So she decides to go through the closet exit for the bedroom out to the front door.
Can y'all just please tell me what happened?
Well, like I said, I think I told you that he was murdered. We still trying to put the timeline together, but obviously we thought you were one of the last people to have been with him. But now, you're telling us that when you left, this guy's with him.
Katrina's account of the night gives the police their first major suspect. But who is this supposed drug dealer? And can they find him before he kills again? Eric Samoa is found murdered in his own bed, shot in the head with a .380. Police are able to get his phone records, revealing that he's been in close contact with Katrina Ben on the night of his murder. Katrina is brought in for questioning and explains that she isn't the last one to see Eric alive. She tells them that when she leaves his apartment, a drug dealer is there.
There were text messages that led them to a phone number, which led them to a cell phone location and then an associated address. They ended up going to that associated address, and this drug dealer was arrested on unrelated drug charges.
We did a search warrant. The purported drug dealer owned a .380. Now, as you can imagine, based on the information coming from Katrina, that he was there when she left, knowing that he was shot with what appeared to be a .380, they thought, well, here it is. This is the murder weapon.
At this point, it looks like an open and shut case. The victim was killed by a .380. A witness places this man at the scene of the crime. This man even owns a .380.
He was interviewed. He absolutely adamantly denied being involved in the murder, and he flat out said, I've never been to his apartment, check my phone. And the police did. And never once could they put him through his phone at Eric's apartment.
The investigation into this man does not stop with phone records. The police continue to look into him, but as evidence continues to build, they are forced to concede that he could not have been involved.
And what we did, in fact, was through cell phone records, we found out where the drug dealer was at the time of the killing. We looked at the photo records and realized he never came into the building. We interviewed him and found out that, look, I don't even know where my customers live. I don't go to their houses. They come to me. Using the cartridge case, they were able to exclude the .380 as the gun that had fired the bullet that killed Eric. And so the .380, even though he owned a .380, it was not the murder weapon. It was excluded as the murder weapon.
While the police rule out their prime suspect, Eric's funeral is held, and Katrina says her final goodbye with the rest of Eric's friends and family.
Katrina Ben attended Eric Samoa's funeral, and she sat front and center, and she grieved, and she was dressed to the nines, and I remember as a black dress and heels. She mingled with the family, and she sent her condolences. When the investigation ran cold, the police did ultimately sort of turn back to Katrina. There were a lot of seasoned detectives on this case, and there were just a lot of little things that didn't add up. Some of her reactions were strange. Some of her reactions were inconsistent.
She became the focus in the investigation, mainly because of the text messages. Showed their relationship and showed that there was some tension in the relationship about him not really giving her the kind of attention she wanted. And even on the night of the murder, attempting to break the date before they actually did come to be together, ostensibly to watch some portion of an NBA basketball game.
On June 29, 2012, Katrina is approached at her building by police wearing a hidden recording device.
So at some point, the detectives decided to wear a recorder to go to her apartment to execute a search warrant. Unbeknownst to Katrina, that entire encounter was recorded, and police officers were talking to her throughout that search.
I shouldn't have to deal with this. I'm tired of it. This is what happened. 2.5 months of my life, and this is what I have to deal with. You know, Eric was a cool person, great con for Eric,
but also understand, he's dead.
To me,
He's dead.
Worth all this. He was not.
Obviously, I don't think that you killed him. But the only way I could tell my boss to kind of like leave you the hell alone is to say, we checked the computer, we checked the phone. She doesn't have do you own a gun? Have you ever fired a gun?
No.
Do you have
You should have one.
Do you have a gun in your apartment? Anywhere here?
During that meeting, I think the officer's suspicions were heightened because at that point, she said, I wish this guy had killed me. And officers kind of were perplexed by that. And she said, it probably would be a lot more peaceful for me right now if he had just killed me instead of Eric. And the police were really baffled by that comment, because it was just very cold, it was very calculating, and it was very different from the grieving kind of girlfriend that she wanted to portray at the beginning of the investigation.
Regardless of suspicions leaning toward Katrina, there is only evidence that she's with Eric that night, and nothing to connect her to the actual murder. Because of this, the police instead put their focus on finding the murder weapon.
It might be a bit of a long shot, but at this point, the lead detective on the case begins looking at lost property, which might have been turned in since the date of the murder, with the hope that maybe a gun had been turned in.
So what actually happened was, at that time in 2012, any lost property that was found by the police, it simply was categorized as like one code, missing property. Didn't matter if it was a gun, didn't matter if it was a cell phone, didn't matter if it was a bicycle. So all that missing property just went into one code. So what Detective Rubin did was he pulled every single piece of missing property in those days after Eric Samoa's murder, and there ended up being, I think, like 58 reports. And the second to last report was a discarded 380 Lorsen that was found on the side of 495, not terribly far from Eric's apartment.
When Eric Samoa is murdered in his own bed, the only evidence as to who could be responsible are the ballistics found at the scene, and the fact that his cell phone has gone missing. Cell phone records reveal that Katrina Ben is most likely the last person to see Eric alive. But there's nothing to connect her to the actual act. But the discovery of the .380 automatic Colt pistol could be a key to breaking the whole case.
The missing property report has an account of where and when the gun was found.
If anybody's ever been to Washington, D.C., you'll know that surrounding Washington is something we call the Beltway. It's an interstate highway. It's 4 to 8 lanes wide. In the early morning hours of June 5th, a paramedic who was driving to work on the Beltway, he was in almost dead stop traffic on the Beltway. He was in the far left lane. Paramedics looks out his window and he sees laying on the ground a handgun. He's dead stopped in the roadway. He thinks it's bizarre, but he gets out of his car, picks up the handgun, looks at it, and what he does, which is phenomenal, he immediately goes directly to the police station that's nearest to where he is. But also, this location is only a couple of minutes away from Eric's apartment and the apartment building where Katrina lives.
A gun of the right caliber, found so close to Eric's building the morning after he's killed, is too much of a coincidence to be ignored. But it's not enough. The investigators still need to find the gun's owner.
After the .380 was found on the side of the highway, the officers really did have their work cut out for them, because there is no national gun registration where you can simply take a firearm serial number and track every owner previously of that gun. The only ability for the detectives to do it is to do it by hand from owner to owner.
Turns out that that gun was originally sold in a town in Mississippi. Katrina Ben is from Mississippi. It was initially sold in a gun shop only a few miles away from her house. An interesting coincidence.
Each physical location, they had to access the physical piece of paper related to the gun, and they had to keep doing those steps, which included Mississippi, West Virginia. They had to go to several different places.
The detective goes down to Mississippi itself, and he begins to trace from gun shop to pawn shop to pawn shop how that gun changed hands like 7 or 8 times. That gun was owned by various people.
I won't forget when Detective Rubin called me and he said, we finally got that last trace back. It's Katrina Ben's gun. After the gun was traced to Katrina, the detectives immediately got the arrest warrant for her and went down to Silver Creek, Mississippi, and arrested her at her parents' home, and then interrogated her in Mississippi for the murder. And that, quite frankly, was one of the most bizarre interrogations that I have ever seen.
You still saying you didn't kill her? No. Okay. Do you own a firearm?
Yeah.
Okay, what kind of firearm do you own?
The 380.
Okay, why didn't you tell us that last time?
Because you never asked. I didn't kill anyone, so it's no need for me to say I have a gun. I mean, you never asked. You asked me, have you ever held a gun? Mm-hmm. Have you ever fired a gun?
And Detective Rubin said, no, that's not true. And she said, no, you asked me if I held a gun. And you asked me if I have ever fired a gun. And my answer to both of those were no. You never asked me if I owned a gun. And Detective Rubin's response was, I promise you we did.
Unfortunately for Katrina, the first time she is asked about owning a gun is recorded.
Do you own a gun? Have you ever fired a gun?
No.
Do you have
probably should have one.
What was so bizarre about that interrogation was, first of all, it was so long.
I mean,
she loves to talk about herself. And Katrina Ben will always think that she is the smartest person in the room. And she was going to admit to nothing. But she told her life story. The most interesting part of the story she told was why, when she finally admitted that she owned a gun. And it was because she had 11 stalkers throughout her life.
Think of me as just a regular person. I'm not a detective. I'm listening to the story.
You told me, I said I didn't remember buying it. I just told you I bought it 03, 04.
No, I said you remember buying it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm just a regular person listening to the story, right?
Right.
If I don't have an explanation right now, and it happened before on cases with me, I'll walk away thinking you're basically a cold-blooded killer. I've been in homicide 4.5 years. You're one of the best people I had to deal with, not just like smart-wise, but just, you're very polite. You tell a good story. I tell a good story.
Katrina refuses to admit to the crime at all. But by this point, there's enough evidence that a case is built around the perceived events of the night of the murder.
This was not a loving relationship. The investigation seems to reveal she did not know that. I think she felt her status was significantly more profound with him than it actually in fact was. And apparently there was at least one occasion where she saw him out with another woman. So this was beginning to build. And, if you read the text messages on the night that Eric died, you can see a lot of frustration because even on the night he died, he tried to break the date, but she wouldn't stand for him breaking the date.
What we were then later able to discover through the investigation was before Katrina came down to Eric's apartment. Through her key fob, her movement was recorded that night. She left her apartment. She went to her car. She came back into the apartment building and then down to Eric's apartment. And that's where we believe that she retrieved the gun. Katrina Ben, again, in her own statement, says that she then woke up at about 5 in the morning and she wanted to see what time it was. So she looked at his phone. The phone that was never recovered. And we believe at that point that she accessed the phone and was able to see that Eric was out with several different women, sometimes more than one woman on the same night of the week. And that was Katrina, with her earlier statement, nobody plays me that way.
I will tell you, the nature of the relationship she envisioned is not the nature of the relationship he envisioned. The reality is that Eric had a long-standing relationship with another woman who'd been dating for about a year. The next morning, she went to her car, not dressed for work, left her apartment, went someplace, came back a half hour later, walked back into her apartment, nothing in her hand. She later on claimed that she got gas, checked her credit, she bought gas by credit card. She didn't buy any gas. But if you drove from her apartment, drove down the block and got on the Beltway, because the entrance to the Beltway, where the gun is found, is down the end of her street, and then just sort of looped around and came back to the apartment, it would take you almost precisely and exactly 1/2 hour. She left her apartment with the handgun, went down the street, threw it out on the beltway, came back to her apartment, armed with the information that she was no longer in possession of the murder weapon.
Katrina could tell you everything. She could tell you where she placed a wine glass. She could tell you the exact route they took to a drug dealer's house. But she couldn't remember when she last saw her gun, where she last had it, or where she put it. And for a woman who was so cunning about all these details and so exacting about all these details, it was very easy for the jury not to buy that part of her story.
Oh, you can think what you want to think, and you can stop talking to me right now.
It's not about that. It's about science and common sense.
Yeah, you can keep talking. Go ahead. You want a lawyer? Is that what you're saying to us? That's fine. We'll walk away. Yeah, bye. We'll walk away. Bye. All right. Thanks for the visit. Nice seeing you.
At this point, the evidence is sufficient that even without a confession, there's more than enough evidence to place Katrina Benn under arrest.
She was arrested on June the 21st, 2013, slightly a little bit more than a year after the killing.
Eric Samoa is found dead in his apartment on June 6, 2012, believed to be killed 2 days earlier. After a year-long investigation, with little more than ballistic forensics to lean on, Katrina Benn is arrested on June 21st, 2013.
Our case for Katrina Benn was a very circumstantial case, but we felt that it was a strong circumstantial case, which is why we were comfortable bringing the case. And in Maryland, the law makes no distinction about the weight that you can give to direct evidence versus circumstantial evidence. And the biggest piece of circumstantial evidence we had in our case was the gun. Once that gun was found, Katrina was charged. And then once she was charged, based on the legwork regarding that gun, we were comfortable prosecuting her.
Even without confirmation that Katrina's gun must have been used to kill Eric, the evidence that it could have been used is too much to ignore.
We did recover a bullet from Eric's body, as I mentioned earlier. The bullet became deformed upon entering his body. It was mangled. It was not suitable for comparison purposes uniquely to her handgun because of the deformities that were present in the bullet that was recovered.
There were a lot of coincidences that the jury was going to have to believe that that gun was not the murder weapon. Because Katrina Benn was the last person to see Eric Samoa alive. We could prove that. We could prove it was her gun. So you would have to believe that someone else used Katrina Benn's gun to kill someone she knew. And they did that within hours of her leaving Eric Samoa's apartment. And then they took her gun and threw it on the side of the highway sometime between the day Eric was killed and 2 days later when it was discovered. That area of the highway is only about a 20-minute drive from the apartment. And Katrina did what we call the trip to nowhere. She left her apartment. She left without her cell phone. She was gone for exactly 1/2 an hour. She returned to the apartment. She picked up her cell phone and then she went to work and she was able to make it to work on time. In Maryland, motive is not an element of the offense, but the jury can consider a motive or lack of motive as a reason to convict or acquit. And juries, they want motives, quite frankly. And that was a very hard part of the case for us. But when you looked at the text messages and you looked at the time frames and you looked at how that relationship between Eric and Katrina soured, the motive was sort of the oldest motivation in the book, right? Jealousy and a scorned lover. That is ultimately the motive that we put forth to the jury. In Maryland, it's always the defendant's right to speak last. She spoke at her case and she turned directly to Eric's family and spoke and denied it all. And said she loved him, and that was like a spectacle. The family lost their minds. They ran out of the courtroom. We waited till she was done speaking, and then Detective Rubin kind of ushered everybody back in. The final verdict in the case was that Katrina was guilty on all counts. The jury convicted her of first-degree premeditated murder, and they convicted her of use of a firearm during the commission of a felony or violent crime.
She got the most profound punishment you can get under the law in my state. Life without possibility of parole.
What we said to the judge at sentencing, and I think what is still true today, is this was not a crime of necessity. This was a cold and calculated murder simply because of a slight that this woman felt. Eric didn't take her out. He didn't show her off. He didn't take her to nice dinners, and he didn't call her when she wanted to be called. And that is the sorriest reason ever to take someone's life. Katrina is not someone that can be rehabilitated because there was no necessity for her crime. She killed simply because she felt slighted. And in that case, there's no telling what she would kill over again.
Eric was a good guy. He was a fun guy. He was considerate. He was, by most people's standards, pretty wealthy guy. He was generous. I think he was generous to his friends. He was generous to his family. Obviously, this was catastrophic to them. Eric's family, this was an immigrant family. Eric's mom and dad immigrated to the United States. So this was an American success story. Eric was an immigrant family success story that any family could be proud of, and this family was enormously proud of Eric.
Eric's family was very appreciative for the work that the state's attorney's office and the police department put into solving Eric's case. It was not an easy road, and it was not a straight line, and the case was cold for a while, but the family was very satisfied, I do believe, with the verdict in the case. It is truly a case where everybody that was assigned to that case, I do believe, was in the exact right place at the exact right time to hold her accountable. It really was a team effort between the prosecution, between the police department, the forensics teams. She was so smart. She was so calculating. And there are just so many things that could have happened in a different way that would have left her out of the picture. If Detective Rubin had never thought to look for that Mississippi license plate, the very next day she would have moved to Baltimore and potentially no one would have found her. If Brad Shoemaker hadn't looked over on the side of the road and turned that gun in, it might have been destroyed forever. There were just so many little pieces on that case that had to come together to get justice for Eric.
I think the families of these people, look, if you have a dead son, brother, loved one, they're still dead. I think justice is served to the extent that the person who did this was a cold, calculating execution. I think it was a magnificent police investigation, and we had the benefit of a good Samaritan giving us that gun. So justice is served in the sense that the person who did this killing is in jail for killing him. Still doesn't take away the pain from the family.
Phoenix, Arizona, 2005. The busy western city is getting ready for another summer of fun.
It was too damn hot. And then we had two little stories that made it a whole lot hotter.
It starts out horrific and just keeps getting worse.
These were bizarre incidents. People were terrified.
Bodies are hitting the ground again and again. Every day is a nightmare. Nobody knows who's safe.
I think everybody, including the cops, were a little blown away.
They shoot dogs, they shoot horses. Any living, breathing creature is fair game. And now they think there's more than one. That's just a start.
Phoenix, the capital and most populous city in the state of Arizona. The city is nestled in the northeastern reaches of the Sonoran Desert, but that hasn't deterred anyone from flocking here.
They call it the Valley of the Sun, and it encompasses about a half dozen cities, and you wouldn't know if you were in one or the other one unless you lived there. They all sprawl together.
In 2005, the locals find themselves fearing for their lives.
I think there was some period of time where we sort of this growing apprehension that this is going exactly where we all think it's going. And it's really bad.
In the nearby suburb of Tolleson, home to almost 5,000 residents, a dark presence is lurking. A presence ready and willing to take an innocent life. At first, it's random dog shootings. Then, they shoot a horse. Police don't know what to make of the animals being shot at for no reason.
So this little tiny town adjacent to Phoenix has a lot of horse properties and is basically kind of a rodeo town. And someone started shooting the horses that lived in people's front yards and in their backyards.
A horse is gunned down by a .22 caliber rifle. Police must uncover if this is a random attack or part of a bigger scheme if they hope to find the shooter.
These random shootings are taking place, and it's even more unnerving to know that they were animals. Why would somebody do this?
And don't forget, there was also different jurisdictions. So it's hard to see the big picture if you only have one or two cases.
Just these random dogs and horses that were just outside. They were easy targets.
But as the moon appears in the night sky, a dark and unnerving night is only beginning. Later that same night, things escalate.
David Estrada was a beloved young man. He had a mother who doted on him and several sisters who treated him like the pet of the family. He was musical and he was bright and he was movie star handsome. He was struggling to find his way as he approached adulthood. He left home and was living on the streets with his guitar and had a goal to make it to California, San Francisco. David was not an untethered person. He had people who wanted to take care of him. But David was following the beat of his own path and happened to be on a sidewalk that night, sleeping under the stars, something he liked to do.
Estrada has set up camp outside a bus stop nearby, and he sees a car slowly creeping up.
And someone drove up alongside him and shot him.
It's just an act of sheer cowardice on the shooter's part. Estrada was gunned down in cold blood. If it's indeed the same shooter, they've stepped up their game. You know, shooting a random horse is one thing, but killing a person randomly at a bus stop is on a whole nother level. It's almost as if the shooter was trying to get up the nerve to kill a person by shooting the horse first.
Detective Ron Rock from the Tolleson Police Department came to the murder scene of David Estrada that night, and there was change on the sidewalk next to him, money. There was a nice quality guitar nearby. So he looked at this and said, this isn't a robbery. This is not someone who came up to him and said, give me all your money or take all your valuables. So Ron Rock, to his credit, knew there was something distinct about this murder.
Well, it appears as though they drove up and offered him some change and then shot him in the face. But there's no indication or no clue as to why they did this.
Officers make a critical discovery. bullet slugs from inside the victim. The slugs are sent to the police crime lab for further analysis.
And it was, devastating to come outside in the morning and find your horse bleeding or lying on the ground dead. But these seemed isolated because it didn't have anything to do with Phoenix. It seemed like a small town case. There was a Burger King that got shot out, a murder on a sidewalk somewhere that seemed puzzling, but no one was connecting the dots.
Police discovered that the .22 caliber bullet casings that were found at the scenes where the horses and dogs were shot came from the same gun responsible for the killing of David Estrada. A profile is beginning to emerge, but will it hold up?
Exotic dancer Georgia Thompson is walking through her apartment parking lot after a late-night shift. She hears someone behind and yells at them to leave her alone, but is shot dead at point-blank range with a .38 caliber handgun. Police are perplexed. Are these crimes connected? When they look at what's happening in the city, they realize that just a few weeks earlier, a sexual assault occurs in the same area.
They were walking home and forced these two young women behind some bushes and made them undress. One of the young women was visibly pregnant.
Then, a week later, there is another sexual assault, but this one combined with a robbery. Police question locals to see if anyone has seen or heard anything. But aside from Georgia's screams moments before her death, they have nothing to go on. They plead with citizens to provide any information that can lead to an arrest.
No one could have imagined that this is just the beginning.
3 men were found shot, 2 dead in downtown Phoenix.
In the wake of so many killings, the community was just on razor's edge.
If the citizens of Phoenix were scared before, they're absolutely terrified now.
Disturbing crimes are happening around Phoenix, Arizona. Women have been sexually assaulted, and 1 murdered, and several people have been shot, randomly targeted at night, along with several dogs and horses. Using ballistic evidence, police have discovered that the same gun is used in both the David Estrada murder and the animal killings. It appears they have a serial shooter on their hands. Over the next few weeks, more incidents occur. Sexual assaults and robberies are becoming commonplace. Shortly before 10 p.m., a dog named Shep is killed. And another named Irving is shot and wounded by a .22 caliber rifle within a few blocks of each other, just north of Camelback Road in Glendale.
One of the major differences between being able to compare a .22 caliber bullet casing from that of a shotgun, for example, a .410, is that a .22 caliber casing can be matched to the firearm that actually shot it. This is very difficult, almost impossible to do with a shotgun shell.
As the canine body count rises, so too does the human count.
Nathaniel Schaffner went to a convenience store one night. He walked over, and as he walked away from the convenience store, got a few blocks away, he came upon a scene where there was a car pulled over in a dark street, and there was a gun coming out of the window, and the barrel of this gun was pointing at a stray dog that was innocently capering about the scene, trying to find something to eat. Nathaniel came up to the car and, in an angry way, said a lot of things to stop them from shooting the dog. Don't shoot that dog. So what happened? The men in the car shot Nathaniel instead. Sometime later, an off-duty police officer was coming home from a social occasion with his wife late at night, and as he turns down the street, his headlights light up a man laying in the street with liquid all around him. He thinks what anyone would think, this is a man who's passed out, and that's beer. And he didn't have all his equipment with him, didn't have his uniform. He didn't feel like he was the right person to handle it, but he did call it in. Paramedics arrived, and they leaned over Nathaniel Schaffner, and they said, "Oh, this isn't beer, this is blood." So Nathaniel Schaffner died protecting a stray dog.
At 6 p.m., 39-year-old Tina Washington is attacked and killed.
Even by a veteran cop's standards, it was a terrible scene.
A witness who manages to hide behind a steel door.
But the man, in his terror, was unable to give them a good description. That crime scene was very valuable to police because they found a shell casing. But the savvy detectives there at the scene noticed that she seemed to have no jewelry. Turns out that Tina Washington had what was called a mother's ring. That was gone. One of the sons told police that that was missing.
Police wondered if these killings might be connected, changing weapons for different scenarios. For example, using a handgun when he's on foot, or when he's in his car using a rifle or a shotgun. But this all changes on December 29th, 2005.
At 7 p.m., the shooting starts. First, it's a bartending school, but no one is hurt. Then, at 10:10 p.m., a dog is killed while being walked by its owner at a park. 20 minutes later, Jose Ortiz is killed on North 10th Avenue in Phoenix, and Marco Carrillo is shot and killed 1 block away. At 11:39 p.m., Timothy Torde is shot in the neck and wounded nearby. Shortly after midnight, 2 dogs are shot and killed on East Granada. A German Shepherd is also killed on North 32nd Street. At 2:15 a.m., an off-duty Marine is shot and wounded.
I think you could say the official start of the serial shooter case was December 29th, 2005. This is when 3 men were found shot, 2 dead in downtown Phoenix. And the detective working that case the next morning got a call from a detective from a tiny little police department in a tiny little town adjacent to Phoenix who said, "You know, I have an unsolved case from earlier in the year. This sounds an awful lot like your case last night."
Overwhelmed with bodies and ballistics, detectives soon make a startling discovery. All of the victims of the drive-by rifle shootings are males and animals, and all of their handgun victims are female.
This changes everything. It's definitely a breakthrough in their investigation.
Could there be 2 active serial killers on the loose, both operating at the same time?
We were hearing police say serial killer, not serial killer. Oh, it's a rapist, it's this, it's that. We didn't know what was going on. If you were just a regular person not privy to everything that was happening inside the police department, you didn't know what was going on. All you knew is that you were frightened.
If the citizens of Phoenix were scared before, they're absolutely terrified now. Anything and anyone could be next.
Starting in early summer of 2005, a reign of terror has been waged over the residents of metropolitan Phoenix, Arizona. On the fateful night of December 29th, 2005, a rampage leaves 2 men dead, along with several other dogs and a wounded ex-Marine. All shot with either a .22 caliber rifle or a .410 shotgun from a passing vehicle. While these instances occur in a similar pattern, at the same time, a serial predator is haunting the areas around Baseline Road. These crimes are done on foot, using a handgun. With already 7 instances, including robbery, rape, and murder, the profiles of the separate instances indicate their worst fears. 2 separate serial killers are at work in Arizona.
Now the police are dealing with what are believed to be 2 active serial killers. They need to work around the clock to try to catch them. They decided to break the unit into 2 groups. One dedicated to catching who they called the serial shooter. The other group was dedicated to catching who they called the baseline rapist. The baseline rapist came to be known as the Baseline Killer because the victims were killed in the area of Baseline Road.
Authorities discover evidence that could further the Baseline Killer case.
It's a gunshot fired off by the rapist to scare away onlookers that conclusively ties the assaults and robberies to the murders. Police are able to match the casings to the .38.
The rapist murderer was doing everything in his power to prevent any DNA evidence from showing up at his crime scenes, from attempting to use condoms, to making the victims rub their saliva with dirt and then rubbing it over their own bodies to basically pollute any DNA that he may have left on them.
But for as carefully as he tries to cover his tracks, the Baseline Killer soon slips up. Detectives are able to recover DNA evidence from one of the previous sexual assaults. Now they have a lead. But as much as detectives learn over the course of their investigation, in 2006, his pace of assaults picks up. 18 separate attacks take place, which are all attributed to the Baseline Killer. That number rises to 23 over the next several months.
February 2006 proved to be a very bloody and terrible time. 2 women, hardworking women working in a food truck, Romelia Vargas and Myrna Palma Roman. These 2 women were found brutally murdered early one morning inside their food truck. And then March comes along, and another one of those headline-grabbing, gut-punching stories. You had 2 young workers at a Yoshi's restaurant, George Chow and Lilian Sanchez. They were closing down. These 2 young people murdered by what was now identified, and police were looking for the serial rapist and murderer. And shortly after that, a woman named Sofia Nunez was found dead in her bathtub, found by her young son, who was worried about his mom when she didn't come to school to pick him up.
The community is at wit's end, dealing with seemingly weekly events of new deaths and assaults. Authorities make pleas to the public to come forward if they know anyone or anything that could lead them to the killers.
The officers in the community feel helpless because people that they're sworn to protect are being targeted. All they can do at this point is hope that they collect enough evidence fast enough to bring the case to a conclusion.
Meanwhile, the so-called serial shooter hasn't struck since that fateful December 29, 2005 night. And police still haven't been able to get a description of the shooter's car. It could be anyone. The summer of fear starts when Claudia Gutierrez Cruz is shot and killed on May 2nd with a shotgun.
She'd gone in for an extra shift as a glass stacker at a restaurant in Scottsdale because she thought they might need extra help because there had been sort of a strike that night. And they said, you know what, I think we got it covered, you can go. And she came home on the bus, but the connecting bus, it was too late. So she had to walk where the further bus left her off, all the way to her apartment. And she died.
That same night, 17-year-old Kabili Tambadu is shot and wounded.
He had been sent to the store that night to pick up some milk at the convenience store, so that's why he was on the sidewalk that night. And he was shot in the back, and the 17-year-old boy who's made it all the way to America from a very troubled, traumatic background from a war-torn country in Africa, Sierra Leone, staggers from the sidewalk through the bushes into the marble floors of a hotel and drips blood with him across their marble floors and asks for help.
Over the next 2 months, the carnage holds the city hostage. During this shooting spree, 2 Walmarts are set ablaze. Adding to the general carnage that Phoenix residents are dealing with, little do police know that these fires will be key later.
It was really scary living in the Phoenix area at that time because you had 2 serial killers working at the same time. I personally am unaware of that happening at least not commonly anywhere before. Employers were putting up flyers, do not go to your car alone. People stopped jogging, all of this, because it was just too frightening. And, you know, with good reason. People were dying and being maimed and traumatized. It was horrifying.
Detectives set up a tip line in the hopes of gaining vital information that will help them capture the serial shooter. And they get no shortage of calls, straining their resources as they try to make sense of all the leads. And just when people start thinking it can't get any worse, it does. The baseline killer strikes again, but this time for all to see.
Then along comes June 29th, in the summer of 2006. A young woman named Carmen Miranda is washing her car. Not only do they get their first sort of look at this guy, they get their eyes on the body of this guy. And as shocking as anything was just the violence and the speed of the attack. It visually confirmed what all of these other crime scenes had told police, that this was really just a ferocious, scary predator. Because he set upon this woman with such speed and such force, threw her into the car, drove her off, sexually assaulted her, killed her. Her body found a short time later. In the wake of so many killings at this point, the community was just on razor's edge.
But authorities won't have time to rest. Another killer is on the loose. And July 1st, he strikes again. This time wounding Diane Bien and Jeremy Ortiz in 2 separate instances that night. With so many shootings, how can there be no witnesses?
One of the most effective things about the serial shooter style of mayhem was they took people from behind and people who weren't expecting to be assaulted. And this is why they had very little witness testimony, because people are just walking down the street and they get shot from behind and they never see what happened.
27-year-old Ashley Armenta is walking down the street when the assault happens.
When Ashley came into the hospital that night and they picked out the pellets from her scalp and police interviewed her, Ashley knew a lot about cars in general. She knew all about the model, make, year, everything. So she had a good idea of what the car was.
A light blue 1998 Toyota Camry. Despite other victims' descriptions, Ashley's is the first definitive answer to make and model of the vehicle.
One thing that was difficult for police is that when they did get a description of the car, people reported different colors. The paint on that particular car showed different in different light. It had different mixtures of paint in it, and different ones, purple, blue, gray, showed up in different light. So that explained why the color seemed different to different people.
Then, just a few days later, more carnage on the 12th of July, when Raul Lopez Garcia is shot while riding his bike in Mesa. Just when they could use a break in the serial shooter's case, a lead comes in. A phone call that will change the course of the investigation. There are 2 active serial killers on the loose in Phoenix, Arizona. The serial shooter shoots unsuspecting pedestrians and cyclists, while the baseline killer commits rapes and murders, centering his attacks largely on and around Baseline Road.
The crimes that were committed by this serial shooter were very senseless. You couldn't put a motive to it. Who was going to shoot someone's dog at the end of the leash that they're walking? Who was going to shoot a horse in someone's backyard? Who was going to shoot a guy sitting on a bus bench? Who was going to shoot a guy trying to protect a dog? These are senseless. A rape case is very specific. The motivation is obvious.
The serial shooter victims have all been shot with a .22 caliber rifle or a .410 or 12 gauge shotgun from a moving vehicle identified as a late 90s Camry. The baseline killer uses a handgun.
With video evidence recovered from the previous attack of the baseline killer, police are able to release a composite sketch to the public. He appears in the video to be an African-American male.
The informant that really broke the case of the serial shooter was a man named Ron Horton. And Ron Horton was an old drinking buddy of Sam Deaton.
Sam was from the Midwest. He was from Minnesota, where he grew up, and his mother at times had come out here to Phoenix. As an adult, he became a union electrician, so he could work a good job, but he had trouble with his temper and his reliability, so he lost his union job. Ron Horton wasn't the kind of guy who watched news or read newspapers, so he wasn't really aware very much of the whole serial shooter crisis in the area. But one night he was at a bar with his friend Sam, and Sam said the strangest thing to him. He said, "Have you ever killed a man?"
Sammy apparently was one of those kind of guys who, when he got a belly full of beer, he shot his mouth off too much, and apparently had boasted to Ron that he had shot people.
Ron says, "No, what are you talking about?" And he noted this and thought this was really odd. Later, he did become aware of the serial shooter case, and in fact, a picture of Sam was circulated on the news from the Walmart fire. In June of 2006 was a bad month and a particularly bad night. There was a Walmart that was set on fire in the west side of the valley. One thing about Walmart is it has really good asset management, really good security. So they have cameras all throughout their stores. So the night of those two fires, they had people reviewing the video from every single camera, and they were able to determine that two guys probably set both fires, and they were able to take stills from the video, supply those to the police, which had them circulated on media. So now we had a picture of two guys with a distinctive tattoo and a distinctive T-shirt circulating for people to possibly recognize them. And Ron was fearful that maybe Sam was the guy in the picture, but he was divided because in his social circle, you don't snitch. And he felt really bad about maybe getting Sam into some trouble for no reason.
Ron didn't immediately act on this, and I think, as he would say himself, to his great regret. But in short order, after Ron had been told by Sam of the killings, a young woman named Robin Blasnick ends up being shot and killed in Mesa, Arizona. All the earmarks of the serial shooter.
Robin Blasnick was killed on the last day of July, and it was a fever pitch. I think everyone really felt electrified by Robin because she was such a vulnerable young girl that everyone felt like she was their daughter, their sister, and we thought, we can't take any more of this.
Ron Horton hears about the killing of Robin Blasnick. He thinks about his friend Sam Deaton talking about going around killing people. At that point, Ron Horton calls police and says, "I think my friend Sam Deaton had something to do with this." Police then ask Horton to set up a meeting with Sammy Deaton. They meet at a place called the Stardust Inn, a little bar on the west side. Police set up a surveillance, and they wait for Sam Deaton to show up.
They asked Ron to particularly tell Sam that he could not give him a ride home, that he'd have to have someone come pick him up. They waited till Ron left, and Sam was waiting for his ride, and they saw this car drive up and pick up Sam, and it sure looked like the other guy in the photo.
A guy named Del Hausner. And that is the first time cops had the name Del Hausner, but one of the lead investigators say he was sitting in that parking lot, and when he saw that Camry pull in, he said, "We got our guys."
Dale had 2 marriages under his belt. He moved on with other girlfriends, and he now had a little baby daughter with another woman. He was working for the city of Phoenix at the airport as a janitor.
Dale also works as a boxing photojournalist. He loves to feel like he's in the middle of big things.
From the moment Sam was picked up that night at the bar, those 2 men were never alone. They had a tale for the next 3 days of their lives.
They have a GPS monitoring device on Hausner's car, and Sam and Dale are just driving around aimlessly. with cops following them.
The two men continue driving around Phoenix under police surveillance.
So they observed the car slowing down when there was a lone pedestrian. And so their strategy to prevent someone getting shot while they were watching was to speed up and get close and act like they were going to witness it, because they didn't have any way of stopping a shooting. They followed them back to an apartment in Mesa, and they had an emergency meeting with the county attorney to get an emergency warrant to do a FUG in the apartment.
They went to the apartment next door, put up a monitoring device so they could listen to their audio.
They have a lot of surveillance on the apartment, and at one point they have Sam come out and take a trash bag from inside the apartment to the dumpster. One of the guys who's been hiding in the bushes jumps into the dumpster and pulls out that trash bag, and they hightail it down to downtown Phoenix to go through the bag. And what they find in it is further confirmation that they have the right guys. They find a map that's marked up with the sites of the murders. They have a soda can. Pick it up, it rattles, dump it out. What's in there? A .410 shell.
The police want to make a move, but there's a problem. An unexpected person is at the apartment with them.
A complication has come up, and that is that during the time of the surveillance, Dale has picked up a very small child, about 2 years old, and brought it home with him. This is his own daughter, it turns out. And what was really awful on the tapes of the bug, they hear Dale teaching his daughter just to laugh about the killings.
Hey, good night, Sam. Night. See you in the morning. Hey, don't kill anybody.
They can't do a raid with a baby inside there, so now they have to regroup. What are they going to do?
Anytime officers gather for the purpose of doing a forceful entry to execute a search warrant or effect an arrest of a suspect, they would have to do a risk assessment. They would have to do surveillance on the property to determine if the subject that they're looking for is present and who else may be present, and that would include the presence of children. And they would have to weigh very carefully whether or not it was worth taking the risk that an innocent child may be injured in order to continue their investigation at that point. If officers determine that a child is present and there is a person of interest or a suspect who may be armed and dangerous in that location, most often we would expect that they would continue the investigation, continue surveillance, and attempt to make that arrest at a time where there's less risk to innocent people.
But can this tactic work until they lawfully arrest the killers? Arizona resident Ron Horton has just heard some disturbing news. A longtime drinking buddy, Sam Dietman, has boasted that he and his friend may be the serial shooters. Ron has no choice but to let police know. Now, police are following Sam and his friend Dale Hausner, who are cruising around in a vehicle that matches the description given by witnesses to belong to the serial shooter. Police rush to get the necessary warrants together to bring the two men down.
So this is a very harrowing night for the cops. And they also had a helicopter overhead that was observing them. And when someone on the ground could not get close enough to the car to prevent a potential shooting, they actually had the helicopter buzz the car, fly low, so that the shooters would look up and go, oh, better not do it right now.
I know that one of the investigators who was there that night following this said it was one of the worst nights of his life because he felt as if he was following two known killers who were looking for another victim, and the police still needed to do their investigation, and their biggest concern was they were going to pull a gun out the window, and before the police could interact or intervene, another victim was going to go down.
After 2 days of surveillance and everything is in its place and the circumstances that are necessary have presented themselves, it's time to bring this nightmare that is the serial shooter to an end.
Once they identified these guys and got the audio from the neighboring apartment and all the evidence, they rounded these two guys up and hauled them downtown and booked them.
The things they find inside the apartment are telling. There are guns, ammunition, and even a scrapbook of news clippings following the investigation of the serial shooter and the baseline killer.
When police executed the raid at the Mesa apartment of Dale Hausner, they found a treasure trove of information, including a whole slew of weapons, I believe about a dozen firearms. They ended up doing, I think, most of the last shootings with a shotgun. They found a shotgun and shells and casings and all kinds of ammunition. So, yeah, they were not wanting for evidence in terms of firearms and ballistics.
Police search Hausner's car and find even more evidence that Hausner and Dietman are indeed the serial shooters that have plagued the Phoenix area for the past year. The city is elated, but Dale Hausner refuses to take responsibility for the murders.
You guys have never been together doing anything violently together?
No, hell no, no way. No. As far as I know, no, it's not as far as I know, it's absolutely not, no, as far as any violence with us together, no.
But Sam Dietman has a different version of events.
We had heading up, I don't know what the heck it was, 32nd or 44th Street or something. So he's like, well, sit back. I'm like, all right, why? And the window starts going down. Bought this little shotgun and fired at some fat guy who was walking down the road.
I think you're the mastermind of this entire operation, and have been from the get-go. But you involved Sam, and I think he was willing to go along.
He's shooting people, it's not with me.
No, it is with you.
Dale promptly held himself a news conference, which was a great spectacle. Dale Hausner wanted very much to be a talk show host or a circus ringleader. And a very flamboyant character, loved to talk.
On August 7th, 2006, Hausner goes public with a press conference declaring his innocence.
Why I'm here is because I have Sam Dietman staying with me for about 5 weeks. And apparently at night, Sam had been taking my car out and using various weapons that I have in my house to commit crimes. And apparently they tracked it to my car. And when they came and busted in the house, I was there. And I guess I'm just guilty by association, even though I did not shoot anybody or kill anybody.
Dale Hausner could be what is described as a classic narcissist. He refuses to accept any responsibility. He's self-focused. He lacks empathy.
I mean, it could be anybody. I mean, I don't know, but the person's got to be smart, you know, I mean, because they've been getting away with this for a long time.
Just over a month later, the citizens of Phoenix, Arizona are handed another arrest. With DNA evidence from one of the rapes, in conjunction with the ring taken from Tina Washington's body, and traces of her blood found on one of his shoes, the baseline killer is identified as ex-con and current construction worker Mark Goudreau. He is convicted of 9 murders among 90 charges. He is sentenced to 438 years in his first trial for rape and robbery, and finally to death on March 16, 2007. In the face of his crimes, Sam Dietman confesses to his involvement with the serial shooting and agrees to testify against Dale Hausner.
He flipped so quickly that night because I think he was not only tired of the crime spree, but I think he was tired of Dale. So when the police arrested the both of them, it was Sam's opportunity to get out from under the thumb of Dale and just get away from all of it, all the crimes and Dale.
Dale Hausner goes to trial on October 6, 2008. In a desperate attempt to get the audio evidence thrown out, Hausner's lawyer goes after the emergency wiretaps issued without a judge's permission. But the state prosecutor takes the stand to defend police's actions.
They had followed this vehicle. They were making wide U-turns. They were stopping at empty lots and behaving in a manner as if they might be casing various areas looking for people. I felt that it was necessary to act promptly to stop the killing.
Despite the defense's concerns, the recordings are played for all present to hear, and what the court hears is shocking.
They heard these two guys, these two knuckleheads, talking about news coverage and yucking it up about shooting people.
Oh my God, she looks familiar. You know, Blasnik? I don't think so. I know what Blasnik.
They were mocking the death throes of their victims. They were congratulating each other on getting a higher number of murders.
It's now bring their total to 6. And Conner is higher than that.
The state has heard enough. Dale Hausner is sentenced.
Of the 87 charges brought against Hausner, he's convicted of 80.
Despite appeals in 2008 and 2012, the convictions are upheld against Dale Hausner.
Dale was a wannabe. Boxing promoter, big guy, man about town. Even as a serial killer, he wanted to be a big timer. There was never a moment where Dale said, I did this, and I'm sorry. Those are the kind of statements that may actually mean something to victims. Dale never had the fortitude to do that.
On June 19, 2013, Dale Hausner commits suicide by overdosing on antidepressants in his jail cell.
Phoenix is a pretty mobile city. A lot of people move in, a lot of people move out. The fact is, the people who are new here didn't know who he was, didn't really care. And those of us who did know, we already knew we were safe from him. You want to do a big dramatic gesture and kill yourself? Knock yourself out. Who cares? You're irrelevant now. And I think that is the worst possible hell Dale could have, is not to be important anymore.
Now, over 15 years later, the reign of terror and the summer of fear is a distant memory. The people of these communities have moved on and rebirthed themselves in the Valley of the Sun.